1, 2, 3, 4. Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Chief Constable. Welcome to you and your team and all of those joining us online to this September accountability session. It has been a bit of a break for us all over the summer, and it has been a busy period since our July meeting, Chief Constable, and your report highlights many of the operational issues, pressures and demands that you have faced since we last met. I'm going to start with the issue of hate crime. And sadly, the issue of race hate crime have continued to scourge our community after the shameful disorder in the month of June, with incidents and attacks and reports of intimidation over the last number of weeks and indeed the last few days as well. It is deeply concerning that race hate crime statistics now are at an all-time high record. On a slightly more positive note, as a board, we welcome the new Race and Ethnicity Action Plan published by the PSNI in August, and we do hope that the wide-ranging actions contained in that plan will start to turn these figures around. And more importantly, we hope that it will help to bring those responsible for these attacks to justice, provide assurance and reassurance to the community, and provide confidence to those who have been victims to come forward and report. It is reassuring that those who have been responsible for perpetrating hate crime are being held to account. As I said at the launch of the action plan, policing alone cannot solve the hatred and intolerance that exists. As a society, we must call out all forms of hate crime, and the need for strong political and civil leadership is so important. Sadly, once again, we also saw the appalling burning of flags, effigies and hateful material on bonfires, and that includes names of PSNI officers. Your officers, Chief Constable, have also been engaged at a number of protests and counter-protests over the summer, as well as dealing with disturbing incidents of vigilantism witnessed in parts of Belfast. We do have some questions on these issues, as well as the position with the new guidance issued by the National Police Chiefs Council, and also the policing of the new legislation which prescribed Palestine action. There have been, very sadly, a number of murders over the course of the summer. The tragic events in Maguire's Bridge and Donaghadee focused attention once again on femicide here and violence against women and girls. Our thoughts are with the family and friends of all of those affected, and I'm sure you will update the operational impact given the resources required to support all of those murder investigations. Chief Constable, today we publish the latest human rights annual report with 9 new recommendations. As always, this report is an important human rights health check for the organisation, and this report examines 12 important areas of policing, with our human rights advisor making an assessment of PSNI's current performance against each one. Adhering to human rights principles in policing protects the rights of the public and the rights of the police officers. And on that note, in August, we opened the consultation on the revised Code of Ethics for the PSNI. The code sets out standards of conduct and practice for police officers so that they are aware of the rights and obligations arising from the Human Rights Act 1998. Over the course of the year, we have worked with you, Chief Constable, to make revisions to the current role so that it is fit for purpose for today's policing and ensures that the PSNI serves the public with the high standards of professionalism and care that they rightly deserve. So we encourage anyone with a view to respond to this important consultation. Finally, Chief Constable, we haven't lost sight of the resourcing pressures the organisation is facing, and your report again refocuses attention on that. Your report also highlights the wide range of positive policing work ongoing that doesn't ever reach media headlines. And once again, in working to make communities safer, we have heard about many instances of attacks and assaults on police officers. Finishing on a slightly higher note, the Belfast Mela provided a welcome ray of sunshine in showcasing and celebrating the cultural diversity of Northern Ireland. I'd like to place on record thanks to all of the officers and all of the staff who attended and engaged in that event. So now I'm going to ask you for your opening remarks before we move to questions, Chief Constable.
Thank you very much, Chair. And good morning, members and everyone in the room and watching online. So it's very good to be back after the summer hiatus. As you've reflected in your open comments, Chair, the work of policing did not stop in the summer. It was an extremely busy period for us with familiar challenges and some emerging issues, and I suspect there's quite a lot of ground to cover in questions today. I want to start by praising the outstanding effort, commitment and flexibility of our officers and staff who've worked extremely long hours over the summer to keep people safe and support victims of crime. We had around 300 bonfires, 16 of which caused concerns, and over 1,600 parades that took place in July and August alone. These require policing. We had concerts, sporting events, notably the Open Golf Championship with some 280,000 people attending and over 200 countries having the event broadcast to them. Our record low number of police officers through years of underinvestment mean holding such events in the future will require careful consideration. I'm going to say that again. If we are to hold events like that in the future, this organisation needs to be properly funded or we will not be able to police them. This has a direct impact on the reputation of Northern Ireland. All these events presented planning and logistical challenges for the organisation. I was, though, incredibly proud to see how the PSNI rose to these challenges. We kept thousands of people safe at major events, and all while keeping the everyday, never-ending business of policing going. Away from the headline-grabbing events, the day-to-day reality of policing has had some grim times recently. Since the end of June, 9 people have been murdered in Northern Ireland. That's a shocking statistic. Too many families are now grieving and attempting to come to terms with the appalling loss of a loved one in shocking circumstances. At times like this, when we stop to take stock of policing, we must not forget them. Our teams of detectives, whose investigative caseloads are already far too high compared with other forces across the United Kingdom, are working flat out to support those families to get answers and justice. They are doing incredible work. But due to the high number of cases being managed, coupled with our low numbers of detectives, I considered seeking national mutual assistance for our homicide teams. I think that would be unprecedented. Eventually, people are going to listen to the resourcing challenges of this organisation. In a continuation of the disgraceful rioting in June, we continue to see racist violence, thuggery and intimidation on our streets. Ethnic minority families have had their homes attacked and thugs in Belfast have been stopping and intimidating people on the street for no reason other than the colour of their skin. Even on our own social media channels, there have been several occasions where dozens of shameful comments have been posted in response to appeals for information about missing children from ethnic minority backgrounds. What is going on? Such naked racism has become all too common and blatant in the online space. Against this background, it was no surprise that racially motivated hate crime and incidents have increased dramatically in the last 12 months. These are now at their highest level since we began recording in 2004. This is unacceptable. Everyone across Northern Ireland society needs to call out this hate, violence and intimidation. The PSNI certainly will do so. I want to personally assure our ethnic minority communities that addressing race hate is a priority of this organisation. Last month, as you mentioned, Chair, we launched our Race and Ethnicity Action Plan, developed following extensive public consultation. This important development sets out our commitment to working with communities to tackle hate crime and to being an anti-racist police service. We're also committed to ensure that people from ethnic minority backgrounds feel safe, supported and have confidence in their police service. 62 individuals have now been arrested and 57 charged in connection with the serious racist disorder which began in Ballymena in June. I'm also pleased to see the first 14 convictions for those involved in rioting last August. I welcome the strong message this sends, that such racially motivated violence and attacks on police will not be tolerated. We will continue to pursue those suspected of involvement in recent disorder, including the releasing of their images as suspects and naming them and releasing their convicted images when successfully prosecuted. Our officers will also continue to challenge those small self-styled vigilante groups who claim to be protecting communities when in reality they are seeking to control them. Over the 11th and 12th of July, our officers responded to a range of bonfire-related incidents, including one declared as a major incident due to its proximity to critical infrastructure at Moygashel. And in Moygashel, an effigy-laden bonfire prompted understandable concerns and was rightly recorded and investigated as a hate-motivated incident. As an organisation, we will continue to emphasise that our role is to keep people safe. However, the repeated failure of others to take meaningful responsibility for addressing issues associated with bonfires has again left police to step in at the last minute, often becoming the focus of criticism. I want to be clear that bonfires that display items intended to threaten, intimidate or cause offence are unacceptable. And it's not right that policing alone is left to confront the consequences. But I do want to emphasise that there are also many positives from the summer months. There's been some excellent police work across the country. My accountability report highlights some of these successes, and I very much encourage people to read it. The report is available on our website. Overall, recorded crime levels decreased by over 6%. That's 6,300 crimes from the previous 12 months. However, levels of antisocial behaviour, a major concern in communities, rose slightly, but are still some of the lowest since recording began. I do remain hugely concerned about the unseen and complex nature of modern online crime that is not accurately captured by existing recording methods. PSNI officers have carried out significant drug seizures, brought dangerous offenders before the courts and saved the lives of vulnerable people. I'm incredibly proud of the work this organisation continues to carry out. This success is all the more remarkable given our low numbers, our record low numbers. I've continually outlined the challenges of delivering police services in the face of a crippling funding position, and I remain deeply concerned about our financial situation. We face a £23 million shortfall this year to maintain current numbers. The initial estimate of 21 million has increased to reflect new pressures emerging from supporting the initial stages of the Omagh bomb inquiry. Legacy costs totaling over 20 million annually also continue to be absorbed from core policing budgets, directly reducing our ability to invest in neighbourhoods. That's where our police officers need to be. And legacy costs continue to rise, with the likely changes to the legacy bill almost certain to bring additional demands on the organisation, and of course the requirements of the forthcoming Finucane public inquiry. That will bring further demands again, none of which we receive any financial or resourcing support for. To reassure the board and those personally impacted by those inquiries, I fully support them, but the resources to do that, to provide that support, come from core policing. The executive needs to properly fund its police service. Police officer numbers remain significantly below what's required for safe and effective policing. The longer we are without recovery funding, the more people will come to harm, and the longer it will take to reverse the damage caused by years of inadequate funding. I make the comparison with Greater Manchester Police in my accountability report, and it's somewhat sobering. In 2020, GMP Greater Manchester Police had approximately 6,500 officers and was widely regarded as failing. Today, GMP has 8,200 going towards 8,300 officers, and its performance is being commended. That improvement has been delivered through increased numbers and the proper and reasonable funding of that organisation. The lesson for Northern Ireland could not be clearer. I previously welcomed verbal support expressed for our recovery business case from ministers, which seeks to restore numbers initially to 7,000 officers and 2,572 staff, which is still considerably below what is required. However, there's been little tangible progress and no allocation of funding. I've reflected my serious concerns in our October monitoring submission and will continue to press leaders, political leaders, so that policing is given proper priority in the October monitoring round. I've already mentioned the impact of legacy and our role as a police service, not only to protect life in the present, but also to address the legacy of the past. You will have noted the media coverage of my meeting with Eugene Thompson, the brother of Liam, murdered in 1994, and my delivering a personal apology for past investigative failures. It was important to me that Mr. Thompson, who was terminally ill, heard directly from me as Chief Constable that his family had been failed in that case and that we are committed to doing things better. His subsequent passing reinforced to me the human impact of our work and the need for openness, empathy and respect in all we do across all of our communities. Finally, despite all the challenges facing policing in Northern Ireland, I remain inspired every day by the courage, professionalism and dedication of officers and staff across this organisation. They come to work each day and respond to incidents and face experience that most people will never encounter in their lives. Whether they're policing major events, responding to critical incidents, supporting victims, or strengthening community trust, they do it against a backdrop of a threat to themselves. Our incredible officers and staff continue to demonstrate the very best there is of public service. And it goes without saying, I'm extremely fortunate and proud to be their Chief Constable. I'm now very happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Thank you for that opening remark. As you would expect, we have a number of questions on hate crime and vigilante activity. So what I'm proposing is that we ask, there's 4 questions, I'm going to get them asked and then you can respond to them all together. That's okay. I'm going to open with Nuala McAllister.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. Chief, I wanted to ask specifically regarding the incidents over the past few months in North Belfast. In my constituency, as you were, has been attacks on Catholic families living within the Lower Old Park area of North Belfast, but also now has moved to people from ethnic minority backgrounds. But it's resulted in families fleeing the area, which is something that shouldn't be seen in 2025. And I absolutely accept that it is not just a policing response, that it has to be preventative, and that's not just on the police. But what reassurance can you give families that this is a priority and that the police will do what they can to ensure that people are protected and that they do not need to move out of their homes?
Thank you. I'm going to move the next question to Gerry Kelly, and I think you're on North Belfast as well.
Yeah, well, I'm very aware it's travel from North Belfast to Ballymena and Towndergee, but it's my constituency as well. And of course it is ethnic minorities and Catholics. And sectarianism and racism are the flip side of each other. So I suppose the question is, because it started in May, or at least this phase of it started in May, have there been any arrests? There seems to be an avoidance to say that the UDA is involved, even though all the papers are saying it. They don't always get that right. And there was in a report in the papers of a deal done by the UDA and somebody else. I just wanted to know what the police know about that, if anything, and sort of clear that up. But I think the main thing is, have there been arrests, and do the police accept or believe, or I would like to hear the argument against it, that actually paramilitaries are involved in this?
Thank you, Gerry. Next question, Peter Osborne.
Thanks, Chair. And it's a similar question to others. I would usually approach these issues by reflecting that things will pass at some point. I don't think these issues around racism will pass over the next 2 or 3 years. I think we're in for a long-term need to respond to some of these issues. I would just like you to go over the statistics a little bit, because my understanding is while they've been increasing in terms of race hate incidents and crimes, we are now in a position where there are more race hate incidents and crimes than all of the other Section 75 categories put together. I'm just going to repeat that because I think that's a stunning statistic in a place like this. There are more race hate incidents and crimes than all of the other hate categories put together. Could you expand on those statistics a little bit? I think given the situation outside Northern Ireland and some of the news media and so on, I'm wondering whether some of the language gives permissions, in inverted commas, for people to behave in ways that they wouldn't otherwise behave. I suppose how the police handle that within communities where you have a particular context here of old fears combined with new fears, and that creates dynamics within communities that are really difficult to manage, and how the police are doing that on the ground and what support police officers are given to do that. And I think you've made the point around people who regard control as important. Again, given permission or context where they can exercise control even more based on those community fears that are stirred up in different ways. And so over the next 2 years, 3 years, is there any planning about how the police are going to manage these issues around racism?
Thank you, Peter. Last question is from Les.
Thanks, Chair. Chief Constable, first of all, I'd start by agreeing that it's actually important that people do read your report and what these issues are referenced in there. Alongside what action PSNI is taking to discover and apprehend the perpetrators of the recent hate crime in the outskirts of Ballymena, North Belfast and Donegal, I wonder if you could also say about what action you think should and could be take place against those who are online and, for example, who set out where the farm was where several Filipino workers were living and how to get there, because it strikes me that if somebody had done the same to an employee of PSNI and said, this is where X lives, here's how to find your way to X's house, do what you know, then there would be action taken. And certainly it seemed to be that the initial response was there was very little we can do. I'm not sure that's correct. So I wonder if you could say something about the online stirring of hate and what action and how PSNI can become involved in that. Again, recognising that that's not just a PSNI issue. There are other actors involved in that need to be taking action as well.
Thank you. And over to you, Chief.
Right, okay, thank you. So
And your team.
I'm going to try and deal with each one, but if I miss anything, please come back to me. I will invite members of the team to come in as well. Firstly, I think it's important to underscore, reinforce, make absolutely clear that we all, this board, this organisation, categorically condemn all criminality regards to any type of hate crime, any attempt to intimidate people out their homes, and we all stand in full support of those victims who have suffered unimaginable crimes, not only in the recent months. When I first came here, it was very clear to me there was an issue here around hate crime, and I've mentioned it individually to members of this board, and I've mentioned it collectively, publicly at this board. And I met a number of families who had not reported many crimes against them were clearly racially motivated. There is a major issue in Northern Ireland around this type of offence. I'd also say, building on Peter's question, this is a societal challenge everywhere at the moment. Internationally, we are seeing behaviours, commentary, with regards to migration and difference that causes me huge concerns. Our differences are what is vibrant and wonderful about us. It shouldn't threaten or intimidate anybody. I also am extremely worried about what's online with regards to how people can effectively adopt the internet space as a soapbox and talk about issues that are completely wrong, complete misrepresentation of the truth, and effectively try to incite and encourage people to commit offences and believe circumstances that are completely wrong. It's probably worth just setting out some of the things that we've been doing about the recent uplift, but to, again, because of what we've been doing, not just this year, but in the last 2 years, to demonstrate our complete commitment to support these communities. So we are working very closely across departments within the organisation, but also with our criminal justice partners. And I'm sure today there will be some sort of announcement or statement, if it's not already come out, from the executive around what we've seen, particularly in recent weeks and days, which I very much welcome. But we are determined to be victim focused and communities focused in this organisation, as you know. And we know that the board, as we are with regards to PSNI, will continue to focus as a priority on these cases. We've made sure that we see all of these victims and that we're working with other agencies so that they get the support they need that comes outside of the auspices of what the PSNI can do. Our engagement with these communities is better now than it has ever been, and a number of us, and I know members of the board were there, have been at meetings through this recent period, listening to victims, listening to representatives of these victims, and making sure that as a collective we're doing everything that we possibly can for them. And you'll recall with the disorder last August, I did a video for all of those communities to demonstrate the commitment of this organisation to deal with the racist hatred that they were facing, which I know was incredibly well received. So we're engaging with all of our partners. We are especially as well aware of the impact of our own, within our own organisation and our officers and staff from diverse communities. And we work very closely with our Ethnic Minority Police Association, who helped us incredibly with the delivery of our recent race and ethnicity action plan. And that is a demonstration of our commitment in this space, and I want to talk a little bit about that as well in this response. With regards to the recent crimes, there is a gold structure now in place coordinating the investigation and the response, not just from the PSNI, but from our partners, into making sure that we give the best possible service to the victims of these crimes, and we look to make sure that we prevent future offences from taking place. That gold structure is being led by Chief Superintendent Sue Steen, and she's also involved in working with the Executive Office with their Recovery Coordination Group. And in fact, there's a meeting today of that meeting. And each of the offences that is being reported, there is a very, very good grip around making sure that we liaise with the victims, with the support agencies, and we're doing everything we can to bring the people responsible to justice. And by way of example about what we're doing with the disorder, just some data for you. This disorder was again based on this hatred. These recent offences aren't in isolation. We identified 63 suspects. 62 have been arrested, 14 of those sadly are juveniles. 42 of those suspects were charged overnight to court. 15 suspects were charged with 28-day charging. 3 suspects remain on pre-charge investigative bail. With regards to the specific incidents recently, and I'll start with Nuala talking about North Belfast, on the 21st of May, we began managing ongoing tensions in the lower Old Park area linked to housing allocations. And we responded that day to a number of reports of masked persons in Alloa Street and Annaley Street area of North Belfast. Those males damaged windows at 3 properties and threatened the occupants. All of those incidents are being treated as sectarian motivated hate crimes. The investigation led to a number of lines of inquiry, and following submissions of forensics, a 45-year-old man was identified, arrested and charged to court on the 3rd of June with criminal damage offences. Further incidents occurred on the 28th of August in the same area at Manor Street, with 3 houses attacked. Windows were smashed at 2 of the properties and a range of graffiti was painted on all 3. 1 house was occupied, 2 were waiting to be allocated. In fact, police responding to the initial house came across the other 2, having been damaged while they're investigating it. These are also being treated as racially motivated hate crimes. Our crime prevention officers have visited those residents and are making sure that the Manor Street area in Belfast and other addresses are also visited. In fact, visits have all taken place this week. So police in North Belfast continue to strengthen the engagement with partners, including with the Housing Executive and Department for Communities, to ensure that we are doing this as a team, PSNI and partners issue. And our local neighbourhood policing teams and community impact assessments are being regularly updated. We continue to maintain very visible policing in these areas to deter further incidents. We're using a targeted patrolling plan to make sure we have the highest levels of visibility in the areas. Housing allocation remains the driver of tension in North Belfast, with Protestant Unionist Loyalist communities perceiving imbalance and displacement. Despite intervention, tensions continue, and we're very alive to this, and we understand the concerns of residents. In Ballymena on the 31st of August, the landlord of a property reported that 5 vehicles belonging to tenants at that location had been damaged by fire. All of the vehicle owners are from diverse ethnic minorities. That investigation is ongoing. The victims have all been spoken to and reassured, and risk assessments have been conducted, and crime prevention advice has been provided. Senior officers from the PSNI have conducted visits to the scene and spoken to the local community reps, and you'll be aware local community meetings have taken place. We are working through a number of messages that have occurred on TikTok and on the internet to make sure that anybody responsible for inciting these crimes is identified and arrested and dealt with through the criminal justice process. In Donaghadee, on the 30th of August, shortly before 10 p.m, officers received a report of criminal damage at a property at Killocky Road. That is being treated as racially motivated. The investigation has commenced and lines of inquiry are being pursued. The victim has been directly supported by the PSNI and has been referred by us into partner agencies, including the Housing Executive, to assist them on dealing with the impact of the crime. The local officers are engaged with the wider community, and the Donaghadee Community Development Association has expressed their outrage at what has taken place, reflecting the strong view locally there is no place for hate-related violence or attacks of this nature. Local police remain committed to pursuing all investigative opportunities and to working with our communities to prevent and address this hate-related offending. Where people commit these crimes, I want the board to understand we will pursue them and we will arrest them. And we will see them through the criminal justice process. That's what happened with the disorder. And I mentioned in my opening remarks those convicted from last year's disorder, and the fact that we put their images out as suspects, and we will put their images out when they are convicted for these offences as well, as a deterrence, because there's zero tolerance of this. With regards to the associated activity of what is described as vigilante groups, which I've referenced in my opening remarks. There is no place for these groups. We, as an organisation, are completely below the waterline of where we should be with uniformed police officers in our neighbourhoods. Some of the consequences of what's happened over many years in Northern Ireland with regards to the approach to policing are now coming home to roost. To deal with a lot of these issues long term, we have to have local officers problem solving, working in those communities with all of those communities to ensure there's a confidence in law enforcement, in policing. And we do not have that. We do not have that in any way that it is in anywhere else in the United Kingdom or in the south of Ireland. We do not have the numbers. And for this to be addressed long term, and I agree with some of Peter's comments, this isn't going to be something that is going to be easily addressed. It's a long-term issue. One, and possibly the most critical long-term solution, is that this organisation has the uniform officers in those communities dealing with and preventing these issues. And that is something, and I've been saying it since I arrived here, we do not have. But I am determined that we will. But it will take some time to get those officers in and deployed in those communities. Now, I know that Ryan in local policing has been doing a huge amount, and I also want to bring Dave in because Gerry asked the questions about paramilitary involvement in some of these cases. We've answered those questions before, but these are more recent events, so I want to get Ryan to have the opportunity to talk about some of the more tactical things that we are doing to address this. And I'd also like Davey to specifically address your question about any potential paramilitary involvement. So can I start with Ryan, please?
Thank you, Chief Constable. The first thing is, I think it's really important for me also to join with the Chief and being really clear about my and our condemnation of hate crime, intimidation of people around where they live and where they wish to live is not acceptable. We take it hugely seriously. I hope communities have heard the words that we've said over the summer and said loudly. We've called out racist fuggery where others haven't called it out. It's been important to do that, I think, for our communities. I think that condemnation, those words of condemnation and the seriousness with which we take it needs to be said loudly and clearly. And I may cross some of the things that the Chief has said, but it's because they're important issues and important things. And this is a really important issue for us in the Police Service of Northern Ireland. Firstly, of course, the most important thing to me are those victims that have been directly affected. The Chief has outlined how we have worked with them directly to try and detect those that have committed the crimes against them, but also to prevent then the repeat occurrence of those events through crime prevention, advice being offered to them, support from local schemes in relation to crime prevention around their homes, etc. And that's been really important to me to make sure we've been getting that right and being proactive where we can. And the Chief outlined, Gerry, in terms of those ones in North Belfast, the arrest in June in relation to that intimidation that had taken place there. Just to outline for you, so what happens on a daily basis if there is a hate crime? That is assessed and looked at through our local district management meetings and a particular risk assessment done specific to hate crime to see what more support could be given and if the investigation is progressing as we would wish it to be in terms of the lines of inquiry being pursued, just to give you that reassurance that it is daily business. Sadly, it's daily business for us because of the frequency that we're seeing these things happen, but it is daily business and we take it really seriously. In terms of the preventative footprints, Sue-Ann Steen is leading that work for us. In part, that is around responding to where we've seen events happen, but also trying to get ahead of things. You'll know yourselves through social media disinformation. There's so much out there in terms of where things may happen. We try and, as best we can, work our way through that, getting intelligent information from other partners and agencies to help us be able to surge our activity to support those communities. just this week, for example, in Ballymena, you'll remember following the disorder in May that one of the local schools, St Patrick's, has seen a huge drop off in the number of kids that were going to the school. So they start back this week. So our local team there have been engaging with that school to try and support them, to give people that reassurance they need about kids coming back to their first term at school. Paddy Mullen from the team in North Belfast was obviously at the recent stakeholder meeting that took place there just this week. And I think that was a very encouraging and positive meeting, and a lot of, I think, very clear condemnation and plans for next steps forward in relation to it. And I want us to be absolutely playing our part within that. At a more Northern Ireland level, as the Chief has outlined, work with the Executive Office is ongoing. It's part of the recovery plan in relation to these incidents. For those who've lived and breathed this for the last 18 months, we've had two significant spikes of disorder linked to hate crime and hate sentiment. We've seen hate crime that we've talked about in some detail at various places across Northern Ireland, and we can see the febrile environment that social media is creating around it. So, in Peter, answer to your question, it feels that this is something that will remain, sadly, firmly on our agenda. I also want to be really clear that there's no excuse for it. So Peter asked around perhaps drivers for what's making this happen. I want to be really clear that when I'm talking about this, it's not making excuses. People who commit hate crime, this is on them. It's choices that they take, and there's no excuse for it. But we can definitely see things that are emboldening, encouraging, and indeed creating what some might say is a permissive environment for it. The social media hatred that we see in closed groups that are difficult to see, posts that are made in the various social media channels, and with limited ability and effort to be able to take that disinformation down quickly, not just here locally, but that's spread globally. And we'll all be very aware of how quickly those messages can spread. That's definitely driving the impressionable or giving excuse to those who wish to break the law around this. And in amongst all of this, of course, there are legitimate concerns that people may have around issues, but somehow that's been taken as a green light for others to then commit crime or to use it to justify that in terms of the hate crime. That's why it's so encouraging to hear a collective voice coming out to say that hate crime has no place in Northern Ireland. We want to work really closely and are working really closely with the executive and our partners across government to make sure that we are absolutely part of the agenda which sees there's no place for race crime here in Northern Ireland.
David, just to speak about the issues that you raised, also maybe some of the investigation stuff as well.
Okay, thank you. And quite a bit has been said there, so we'll go direct to the question that Gerry posed. So in respect of the sectarian incidents in North Belfast, and based on the information that's available to police at this time, I believe that individual members and local groups linked to paramilitary groups, specifically the UDA in that area, have been involved in those incidents. We also have information indicating that these attacks were not sanctioned at a senior level. However, as I say, I believe that individual members were involved in those incidents. In respect of the incidents in Ballymena and Donaghadee, at this minute in time, we have no information to suggest any paramilitary links to those incidents. But again, I would appeal to communities. I would appeal to people that have knowledge of these incidents to report those issues to us. And that can be done directly to us in PSNI, but also through Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111. We need more information in respect of these incidents more widely. In respect of Les's point around what are we doing to discover and apprehend the perpetrators, from an investigative point of view, again, I would draw on the examples that the Chief quoted around the disorder last year in August and indeed the disorder in June. And I think that provides evidence of a really robust and ongoing criminal investigation into those incidents and activity. That has involved detectives right across crime department, including our CID detectives, detectives from serious crime branch, from our organised crime branch, from intelligence branch, all supported by local policing in that team PSNI effort to fully address that offending. And I think there's evidence there that we have utilised the full range of investigative tools, from arrests, the utilisation and the speedy downloading of literally hundreds of hours of video evidence and CCTV, searches, publication of suspect photographs, close liaison and discussion with the PPS, and that has resulted in, I believe, robust charging and the opposition of bail when that has been appropriate. And I think the outworkings of that have been, as the Chief said, the 49 arrests in respect of last August activity. 14 of those convictions are now through the courts. And actually, in terms of the June arrests, we're now up to in the region of 70 arrests. So that continues day in, day out in terms of the ongoing work. So hopefully that provides reassurance, but also evidence of the robust investigative approach in terms of those senseless, totally unacceptable activity.
Thank you.
Okay. I was just going to say there's a couple of things. I think it was Peter that raised the issue around data, and this was nodded to by Ryan. So race-motivated hate crimes rose by 48%. That's obviously the biggest rise we've seen. And that was by an additional 434 crimes to take us to 1,329. So there were two particular periods where the crimes particularly increased. They were July to September last year, 2024, with 237 crimes in August of last year. And then May to June of this year, with 241 hate crimes in June of this year. So the numbers are incredibly worrying. What I want to reassure you about is one of the reasons we did the Race Ethnicity Action Plan was because of what we see here in society and trying to address. I just want to talk about 4 bullet points on that plan. But the meeting of victims, the meeting of stakeholders, the listening, the learning, the understanding of what people are enduring is something that we are all in with. And that's happening at every level of the organisation, not just with our officers who respond, but our middle management teams, obviously our strategic engagement team doing some incredible work with stakeholders, but also with officers at my level and the chief officer team level are meeting with these victims regularly, and the people that represent them to really get underneath what's been happening here to make sure we understand how we can support them. And that will continue. There was mention made of a deal. There's no deal with any organisations with the PSNI. I've talked about some of the online stuff that we're still pursuing, Les, so I don't want to go into too much detail with that. But the Race Action Plan did give 4 key bullet points that I just want to underscore. That we as an organisation need to do more to demonstrate that we ourselves are anti-racist. We need to ensure that people from ethnicity minority backgrounds feel safe, valued and engaged by policing. To create a workplace where minority ethnic officers and staff feel safe, respected and treated equally. And finally, to be committed to excellence in diversity, quality representation and inclusivity. And because of what we are seeing in society, that is why it's so important. And I was so pleased for the cross-community buy-in and the support of the board for the action plan. So we're in the middle of another upsurge, I know, around some of these crimes. We're basically throwing the kitchen sink at it. There's daily grit meetings around them. I know we've talked about Sue Steen's strategic work, but there is a grit meeting every day on any new cases that come in to make sure that we're getting all the forensic and investigative bit right, we're getting the engagement right, but we're getting the partnership and stakeholder bit right as well. And I'm sure we'll see some messaging today from the executive about the Northern Ireland team, Northern Ireland approach to making sure we deal with these issues. And we're very much at the forefront of that. Okay.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next question, you have a follow-up, Gerry, you were saying?
Just very quickly, and thank you for the answers. I just want to understand this UDA stuff, that it's not, you don't believe that it's the leadership, but it may be individuals, or it is individuals connected to it. See, some of the reports, if I remember correctly, is, you get from 8 to 10 most people going up to do this stuff. So that's not an individual, that's a group. So I just want to understand, does that mean that at Belfast level or some other level that they're saying that it's nothing to do with them, but that there's a group there? See, it sounds like we're trying to avoid saying, and just forgive me, but I mean, my assumption is that you have a considerable number of people within these organisations who give you information, because that has been the history of the UDA, going right back. So I'm assuming these are getting good information. So I just want to understand when you say it's not sanctioned, but you get groups of these people involved in this and then doing it again, because that's what the residents are afraid of. Could you, could you explain what is meant by we believe it's individuals connect? Is that different instance, just one individual, or is it in a local area? Or what is it?
Well, again, just to be clear, Gerry, thank you. What I'm saying is individual members and groups in that local area that I believe are aligned to the UDA. What I'm also saying is that we have information that would suggest that this is not sanctioned at a senior level. So I think there is a differential between local groups taking action at a local level and perhaps that command level, for want of a better description. So there is a distinction. What I'm giving you is a flavour of how we assess the situation at this minute in time. But again, what I say is that I appeal to people to give us information, to talk to us, to help us fill the gaps around that, because we don't have all the information around all these attacks. If we did, there would be more arrests and people would be before the courts. So hopefully that provides a bit of clarity and in terms of where the situation is at this moment in time.
Very quickly.
I'll be very quick. Just for clarity, in terms of the deal that was in the newspapers, I don't think that it was the deal with the PSNI. I think it was a deal between some individual who was an intermediary and the UDA. So if you know anything about that, maybe you don't, but I just want to ask the question.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that, and I know we need to move on, Chair. Time's short. When we saw the disturbances last year, it became quite, listen, I'll never have ducked these issues, and people play politics. Whatever you're doing involved in this, I don't care if you put the UDA or the whatever acronym you want to use, pack it up. Society doesn't behave like this. Whatever side of the street you come from, this is hateful, criminal, abhorrent behaviour. So it doesn't matter if you're part of a group or an individual, just stop it. And we're coming after you and we'll arrest you. Because this should not be happening. Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to move to the next question from Trevor Clarke on firearms licensing.
Chief, you'll know there's been a theme for some time, concerns from some of us about the inadequacies of firearm licensing, and I know you've launched a new online system today. I actually read about it yesterday online. I see one of the organisations, dealer organisations, is out commending, I suppose, some of the changes that's coming in that, which is good. But I suppose what I want to know is, and I suppose the proof will be in the pudding in terms of a number of months' time, but there's clearly been an issue for the processing times for straightforward applications. So how confident are you in relation to this new system that where straightforward one-off, one-ons will be done in a timely manner and not taking over 12 months, where I have some examples of, and some of the other issues with the backlogs will be addressed, because we were promised last time when the new system went in that that was going to address all of those issues, but some of the experiences for the dealers and others is that it actually got worse. So I suppose what I'm trying to get a flavour of, what confidence have you in this new system that's going to change things?
Okay, well, and I know this is an issue close to your heart, Trevor, and you know, with my background of working elsewhere where there's full cost recovery for firearms licensing, which there isn't here, And I know there are concerns because I've met dealers, licence holders who've expressed concerns around our management of this process. So the new online fully automated systems launched today, okay, and I'll bring Mel into this. What I've asked for is an independent evaluation of how that's working, okay, so that's being commissioned. What we must all remember is that firearms are lethal weapons, and the management of them at whatever level, at whatever stage, is critically important because they are used for illegal acts. And we know that. I talked about the number of murders in recent months in Northern Ireland. So we have to make sure we get this right, that people who are law-abiding, responsible, gun holders interested in sporting activities get their licences quickly, effectively, and can go about that lawful business. But equally, we make sure that we're not doing anything that will put anybody at risk, that we're doing this as getting it wrong. But let me bring Mel in.
Before you do that, I want to come back to something you said before, because I'll get you Alan and Mel on this one. You've used this line before about full cost recovery. You've talked about the review, but will the review include about the effectiveness of the team who are actually doing the job? Because it's all right to spout out about full cost recovery if it's demonstrable that there's efficiencies within the organisation itself. I'm not convinced that the organisation is working to the optimum, so I'm not sure that the public should pay for an organisation that's not working to an optimum itself. The other part I want to make is, and I mean, you're quite right to address that there's guns being used in our society, but the best of my knowledge, most of those guns are illegally held and not legally held guns, and I think sometimes we can confuse that issue.
So, I'm not going to go head to head with you on this because I get quite frustrated by this. We need full cost recovery because this organisation's not been funded, and the board's got a principal role in making sure we're funded, and we're not funded properly. So we need to be funded to deal with the various aspects of our duties that we are required to do. This review will include every part to make sure that the automated system is working as well as it can possibly work, but that we are getting the biggest bang for our buck around the resourcing. Because I think we've got 62 people in there. And if we don't need 62 people in there, we won't have 62 people in there because we need to have people in our communities, policing our communities. That's where our core role is about policing Northern Ireland. So it will include that aspect of it as well. I know of a number of cases, personally, that I've dealt with as a detective, where legally held guns have been used for murder. In fact, multiple murders. So that does happen. So we have to make sure that we do this in the very best way it can be done, respecting those people who are law-abiding and rightfully want to exercise their right for sporting events, wherever it might be, to carry guns and have guns. But equally, we've got a responsibility to protect society, and that's what we are seeking to achieve to the best of our ability. But let me bring Mel in.
Yeah, I'll cover the points, Chief, in order. First of all, you talked about one-on and one-off applications. We see those as relatively simple. We prioritise those, and we aim to complete all of those within 72 hours of receiving them. So within a couple of days, we aim to go through the process and update the dealer, which is mainly dealers with the one-on and one-off. But any one-on, one-off is pretty simple. In terms of the queues, I just want to disaggregate between simple case decision and complex case decision. For the simple case decisions, they are done in a fairly routine and speedy manner. I don't think there's a lot of queues in that system. Complex case decisions, and the cases are judged as complex for the very specific reasons that the Chief Constable talked about. And it is about the risk that firearm may present in communities and the fitness of the person to hold the firearm. So it's around the type of firearm, the proposed use, the number of firearms already held by an individual, the suitability and fitness of that person and the wider family network that reside in the house, and anything else specific around the use of the firearm. We have to do due diligence with those applications to make sure that we're keeping firearms as safe as possible within communities. We do open ourselves up to audit and to scrutiny around the efficiency and effectiveness of the teams that are working. We've had 2 recent audits. Both of those have been external and have assessed our efficiency and effectiveness as good. But in reality, there has never been enough people within that unit to process the number of applications. We have a much higher rate of licence holders in Northern Ireland than anywhere else in the UK. We have around 55,000 licence holders, and between them they hold around 180,000 firearms. So we have a very small team for the number of firearms licence holders and the number of firearms that we are keeping a track of in communities. And it is really important that we do due diligence and that we understand when circumstances change within households. So if there's an incident within a household that means that somebody may no longer be fit to hold a firearm because of something that's gone on within the house, such as domestic abuse, it is really, really important that we act quickly, that we go and take possession of those firearms to minimise any ongoing risk, and that we review that fitness. And as you can imagine, with 180,000 firearms in communities, that is an ongoing big piece of work that has to be done in a timely way. So I do appreciate the frustration of the firearms industry. We work very closely with them around how we can speed things up, how we can be more efficient and effective. I'm really optimistic that the new process and the online process that's launched today will really help with that. It will particularly help firearms dealers because it will retain all of their information on the system and stop them having to resubmit every time they're doing the one-on and one-off. And we are keen to improve. So we've done our data collection and we've submitted it back to the Department of Justice on the 30th of June this year. We do want a fair price for a fair service in a timely way. That's where we aim to get to with this. But it has to be that we've got enough fees to pay for the service and staff the unit appropriately, which is not the case at the moment.
So, Melanie,
Can I ask you to keep it brief? And if it's going to go into a long discussion, we can do it by written procedure.
yeah, there's a lot of that I couldn't disagree with. I think the fitness, yes, and all of those other aspects. And I mean, I'm not disagreeing about the right fee for the right service, but many of us are agreeing the service is not right. One of the examples you give was 72 hours for one on, one off. And one on and one off is not about the capability of the person because they've already been approved, or else you'd be seizing their guns, which I would support. But I have a case that wasn't done in 72 hours, wasn't even done in 72 days. It took a year. So the system is broken. I'm hopeful in terms of the new system that some of these things will be fixed.
Okay.
I mean, let's talk about off table that case, Trevor, because we can, if we've not learned the lessons from that, if there are specific issues as well that you might not know about, so let's talk about that off the table. Is that all right? And I'm happy to meet anybody who's got any concerns as well.
Thank you. I have another question, not related to this, but also it's about firearms. That's from Linda.
Yes, it's definitely coming at the firearms question from a very different perspective, because I actually don't think there's any such thing as a simple application for a firearms licence. I think the figures that we've just been given in terms of 55,000 licences, 180,000 firearms, that's almost 3 firearms per licence. That really, really concerns me, to be honest with you. But very specifically around the issue of violence against women and girls. 30 women and girls and children have been murdered in the last 5 years, and some of them have been with legally held weapons. So what I actually want is some reassurance around what is the process where there is even an allegation of domestic abuse. I'm not even saying domestic violence, where there's even an allegation of domestic abuse by somebody who is in possession of a firearms licence and therefore at least 1 firearm. I'm even more concerned to think that they may be in possession of at least 3 firearms. So if I can get some reassurance around what the process, and I've dealt specifically with cases of women who've come to me, it's now the first question I ask them. Does your partner or ex-partner, because to be very clear on this is mostly, and we know the vast majority of women and children that have been murdered by white males known to them. So I think we need to be clear about that on this board today. And my concern is around that. What assurances can you give me that people who are a risk to women and children are not in possession of firearms, even if they have previously been given and granted a licence?
So what I can say, Linda, and this gives us an opportunity to say this again publicly. Anybody who's got any concerns about anybody who has a licence, a firearms licence, who has legally held weapons, because of anything in their life that causes a concern about them having that licence. That might be addiction issues, it might be mental health issues, but of course, and most definitely and precisely, any concerns about that individual's behaviour towards a partner or anybody, where they would be acting in any way, where they might assault or coerce or intimidate, we need to know about that so that we can make a proper judgment on whether that person should have a firearm. And we should have a no-risk approach to anything like that with regards to information that is taken into account in that decision-making process. There are a number of cases that have occurred in the last handful of years with regards to people with legally held weapons committing serious crimes. It is a really difficult area, but our priority of tackling violence against women and girls, our priority around domestic abuse, should hopefully leave you with an absolute reassurance if we thought there was any risk that that firearm would be used against any person and not for the purpose for which the licence is issued, then they would have that revoked and the firearm would be removed from them immediately. I don't know if Mel wants to add anything to that.
Yes, Chief, just to give you a reassurance as to how this works operationally on the ground. So both within our call centres and control rooms and the officers on the ground, when they're doing background checks, one of the pieces of information they get when they're attending calls is whether or not there are any firearms licences and exactly what weapons should be in any house at any time. The officers have emergency seizure powers for anything around domestic abuse. They are always erring on the side of caution to seize those weapons and to take an emergency seizure. They recover to the police station, and then that inquiry around the firearms licence goes back to the firearms teams and the people who are skilled and experienced around firearms licensing. Those weapons are retained by the police whilst ever there's an ongoing investigation or court proceedings, and at the conclusion of court proceedings, that's when there can be consideration as to whether the firearms should be retained, not until after court proceedings. So once all that's finished, the firearms licence can either be fully revoked, the firearms can be returned, or the firearms licence can be varied to allow a partial or full return, and that happens in every circumstance. And that's what I explained to Trevor in response to the question about the ongoing work around making sure we keep refreshing and revisiting current licence holders to make sure they are fit and proper people and there are no inherent risks to them having firearms within the house. And that applies to everybody within the house around offending, not just the firearms licence holder.
Can I just ask a very quick supplementary? So do all officers have those powers regardless of what rank they hold?
Yes, they do. And they're all fully trained.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And if I
Thanks,
could
that's
just add,
reassuring.
sorry, that as part of the DASH risk process, that's one of the issues that officers have to consider is the issue of licensed firearms as well within that process.
Thank you. I'm going to give you
Yeah, just a quick question.
30 seconds.
What experience or numbers is there, Melanie, with doctors referring to the police to say, I've had an interview, or not an interview, a medical assessment of a gentleman or lady, and I feel them unfit? How many times does that happen broadly, that gun is then removed? I don't want to be specific, but is it a thing that's coming up?
Yeah, it's a line that's available to us, but I wouldn't have that data with me, but I can ask the question and come back to you.
To know roughly what that number is. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll wait for that follow-up. Question from Cheryl Brownlee on investigations.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, for the answers so far. I suppose I just want us to talk about the Crime Stopper reward. So obviously a few weeks ago there was a murder, and within 2 days there was a £20,000 reward. I know throughout Northern Ireland, and particularly in my constituency, there's many unsolved murders, and that of Glenn Quinn to be one of them. My concern whenever I heard that was the inconsistency. You know, who is involved in the process? I know this is with Crime Stoppers, but obviously the police are involved to some degree. So kind of what engagement did the police have with that? What level of engagement happens in terms of discussing cost and discussing when an award is publicised?
So thanks for the question. I'll set out some broad sort of principles, I suppose. So the role of Crime Stoppers is to help generate vital leads for us, and the decision as to whether we would approach Crime Stoppers in the circumstances, and I'll give you the criteria that's involved, is the senior investigating officer, the police officer involved in investigating. And normally it's to find people who are wanted, who present some sort of threat in serious crime. So the types of offences would be murder, rape, violent attacks, child abuse, serious organised crime. And when we're struggling to identify where somebody is, that's ordinarily what we would do. And we've hit, effectively a wall of silence. So trying to gain as much coverage as possible to provide us with a breakthrough. So we would, police service would ordinarily then contact Crime Stoppers in one of those types of investigations when it appears that there's challenges in identifying the suspects or locating the suspects. So the decision rests with that senior investigating officer, all right, with the PSNI. Requests are, as I say, often utilised where there's an outstanding suspect who presents a risk to the public, and investigators think that's the way to help them identify and locate the suspect. They're an independent charity, as I'm sure you're aware, Cheryl. They're an independent charity and can choose to support or decline our requests. There are a number of cases, I've got a list here that I'd like to give you in a written response if I can, of where we have done that in the most recent years, or those circumstances, and the amount offered. And then Crime Stoppers are actually responsible for dealing with that claim and any subsequent reward, but would always come back to us for verification with regards to any information that led to the apprehension of an offender, etc. So it's the senior investigating officer who will make that decision. Sometimes, obviously, we'll go to Crime Stoppers and things happen in parallel, and then we identify where the person is. That often happens. And in the recent case, I think we quickly arrested somebody who's now subject to a criminal justice process. But I'll just bring Dave in to see if there's anything that he wants to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. And yes, Crime Stoppers already mentioned it today, really vital role in terms of closing that gap around information and allowing investigations to be progressed. And they do manage the process around rewards. It is a charity, it is an anonymous system which allows people to report information about crimes without having to give their personal details, etc. And as Chief said, this is very much an issue that will be considered against the investigative strategy by the senior investigating officer, and that's right and proper that they have all the information, they have all the necessary mechanisms to advance that investigation appropriate to the circumstances that exist. In terms of Crime Stoppers, again, I would encourage people to think about and utilise Crime Stoppers. It is 100% anonymous. Crime Stoppers will never ask the person's name, their phone number, or indeed track their IP address if they do it online and provide information online. But that information is then passed to the relevant authority and investigating police force. In terms of rewards, as the Chief says, they are offered for specific offences, primarily in Northern Ireland. We've utilised them around murder investigations. The amounts are generally set in consultation with Crime Stoppers, but can range from £1,000 to £20,000. And generally those amounts are announced at the time of the appeal. Sometimes the rewards can be higher, but that's specific to really high profile cases from time to time. And that's generally funded by Crime Stoppers or indeed through other businesses and other organisations that may offer support in that respect. If someone provides information that to arrest and charge, then they may be eligible for a reward. Crime Stoppers will conduct checks through the investigating authority, so through us, as that may be appropriate here in Northern Ireland, to confirm whether the information was crucial, and that's a really important part. It's crucial information that leads to the arrest and charge. again, the payment system is set up again that it confirms the anonymity. So just to reassure people that would consider that the payment does not breach that confidentiality issue as well. Claiming rewards is entirely voluntary. Lots of people provide information because it's the right thing to do and to help, but it's also right and proper that we utilise rewards and Crime Stoppers to, one, enhance the focus on the investigation, to enhance the potential for opportunity to solve, and to enhance the protection across the community, specifically in respect of really serious offences and where we believe that there's a real risk in terms of the safety of the community. That provides you with a bit of an overview. As you say, it's limited in terms of my ability to delve into specific cases because many of those cases remain live, and also because of the anonymity behind the process and that those are managed by Crime Stoppers. But again, happy to have a conversation offline if that assists in terms of your understanding around particular issues.
Thank you to you both, and thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to say, I suppose it's one of them things. I think the public and me as well, it's trying to understand that process and how that works, and it's to ensure that there's consistency and that everybody's treated, I suppose, fairly in terms of the victims and their families. And I think it's trying to get that across. And I know this is going to be looked at on a case by case basis, so it's not something that you can generalise. But I think it is important, you know, that people do feel that every single, whether it be a murder or domestic violence or any victim of crime, is treated fairly, you know, within all the systems that we have. So thank you for the update, and I'll obviously get a written response for those as well.
And the only thing I would add, you know, having looked across a range of cases over the last number of years that they have been involved, it does cross over domestic cases, paramilitary cases, serious and organised crime cases. So there is that wide breadth of cases across it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question is from Tommy O'Reilly on the engagement with minority staff associations.
Chief Constable, I want to focus on the workforce element of the policing plan. And we all know that the cultural audit plays a key role in setting out the priorities to be able to identify that focus and what actions need to be taken. And I understand the work has now commenced on the development of the bank of questions for the forthcoming cultural audit. Okay? And at earlier board meetings, you have spoken rightly of the importance that you attach to the role of the various staff networks within the PSNI. And even this morning, you've referred to the race action plan and the role of the ethnic minorities group there. So can you give the board some assurance that mechanisms are being put in place to ensure that the various staff networks within the PSNI are going to be formally consulted on the bank of questions that are going to be included in this year's cultural audit plan to ensure that the voices of their members are heard and that the actions that they're saying need to be taken are included in any forthcoming action plan?
Yeah, of course, and thanks for the question, Tommy. So you remember we did do a cultural audit in 2023, and there was some criticism from the groups. We got a private company, independent company, to do it. They framed the questions, and we're a learning organisation. I think a number of the support groups felt that there wasn't enough emphasis on protected characteristics and diversity. So we undertook to make sure that we do a follow-up audit and that we would work with those groups to help frame the questions. At the same time, there's been some work commissioned by the Home Office to do a cross-policing survey around a temperature test for police officers and staff and how it feels to be in the police service. So we've also got an agreement with the organisation doing that survey. So we'll be able to compare ourselves nationally with our organisation feeling with how officers and staff from colleagues in Great Britain policing feel that they, you know, are at the moment in the police family. So the questions have got sort of two backgrounds to the survey that we're going to do. It's going to be in September, I think the dates are now. The questions are going to be done, and we have worked with our support groups around framing the questions that matter to us around the diversity element, that we have listened to what's been said previously. So I'll get Claire to talk to you a little bit more about that, but I think we're in a good place. We said we'd do it in the autumn, we're doing it. I've seen the questions, I think the questions are good. Bobby's chairing a Your Voice forum. Your Voice is where all our support groups come together with us as a chief officer team. I'd normally be in that meeting, but I've got to, for that particular one, be in London that day and back again. But Bobby will be chairing it. So we'll again touch base with them around those questions to make sure that they are happy, as if you like a final sign off, that we've got it right. I'm sure there'll be lessons learned after the survey's done about, again, how we might need to improve the next one. But at the moment, I think we're in a pretty good place around listening to those groups and getting the questions framed in the right way. But let me just ask if Claire wants to add anything.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I will also use this as an opportunity to say to all of our staff and officers that we really encourage them to participate in the survey. As the Chief Constable has said, a survey looking at inclusion in particular and inclusion within our workplace and for our workforce. That survey will go live on the 15th of September. We want as many people as possible to participate. Back in 2023, we had one of the highest levels of participation in these types of surveys across policing in the UK, and we want to, hear the voice of all of our workforce. Everyone's voice and experience is important to us, and it will help us shape what we do going forward. Those participating can't be individually identified, so we hope again that encourages people to be honest in sharing their views and experiences, and most importantly, we're committed to being fully transparent with what that tells us and taking action on it. Just in terms of developing the questionnaire for this, what we're sort of describing as a pulse survey. It's part of a bigger programme of work. We will do a full re-audit from our cultural audit at the end of this financial year, at the start of next year. This is a bit of a pulse survey which will do a bit of a deeper dive into the theme of inclusion. We've developed it because it was a recommendation from the 4,000 voices that participated in the survey back in 2023. The Chief has mentioned that we're also wanting to have some type of comparison to other UK police forces. So we've worked with Leapwise, who are helping us with some of the questions, so we have those comparisons and benchmarks. Our Your Voice Forum is attended by the Police Federation, Superintendents Association, NIPSA, and all of our minority and diversity staff associations, and we've heard directly from those groups about the experiences and views of their members, and again that has been instrumental in shaping some of the questions of the survey, and indeed the proposed survey has been communicated and shared through that forum and with all the groups, and they've also had the opportunity to meet with one of the members of my team who is instrumental in this work, so we've been able to again ensure that how the survey is developed is easy to answer, it doesn't take a lot of time, and very notably it's the first time that we're going to be introducing what I call our 3 powerful workplace questions, and those questions are going to repeat every time we do some type of sense check about employee engagement, satisfaction or workplace culture, and those are that asking our workforce, our staff and officers, are they proud to work at PSNI? Do they feel valued for the work that they do? And would they recommend PSNI as a place to work? So those questions will repeat no matter what the theme of our surveys are going forward. So I hope that goes some way to providing you assurance about the role that they've played in helping us shape this approach going forward.
It does, Claire, and I think look forward to getting the results from the Pulse survey. But I'm really interested in terms of the survey, the full cultural audit survey next year. And so whenever I look, and the Chief referred to the sort of specific objectives for the 5 commitments around race, and many of these same commitments can run across other groups as well, but committing to officers and staff from particular backgrounds that they feel safe, valued and are treated fairly and equally in the workplace. Clearly, you'd like to see those question, those values being reflected in the questions. So particularly for the one for next March. So again, I'm just looking to ensure that there's that commitment to involving them both through your voice, but as you develop the bank of questions, that they have an active role as part of that process. So thank you very much for the information.
Thank you. Next question, Peter McReynolds on flags.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, for your answers. I'm keen to understand what work the PSNI is currently undertaking to address illegally erected paramilitary flags, and I suppose not national flags in this instance, although I've got a bit of an issue with that as well. And I find it quite disrespectful how some of them are left up for months on end, but keen to specifically address paramilitary flags which are prescribed organisations under the Terrorism Act. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I say this as a sidebar. Recently, I was driving in England, and there seems to be flags emerging all over England now. They seem to be following a pattern of Northern Ireland with regards to flags. Anyway, firstly, there are obviously we don't have any tolerance for paramilitary flags, but there's a challenging history here. The board will remember that we provided an operational update with the guidance that we have on flags and hate displays, and we provided that to our officers last year. And following consultation with stakeholders, we're now very close. In fact, I think we provided the Human Rights Advisor, John Wadham, with the updated version of our guidance yesterday on releasing that guidance for officers. Bobby has done a huge amount of work on this, and in my time here, you'll recall I've said here that where there are flags that we can get down, we should take them down quickly. And where we're able to do that, that is my direct instruction. Where it's on street furniture that we can reach it and safely get it down, let's just get them off the street. If it's not safe for us to do it, then obviously the responsibility is on the owner or landowner to remove that flag, and we will do everything that's required to make sure they're aware of that legal responsibility. And where there are concerns, which inevitably they are, we've had some commentary in this board meeting around groups of guys in balaclavas, where there's any concerns that there be any risk to people who own the street furniture or the property in removing it, that we're there to support them and make sure that it can be safely done. But let me bring Bobby in, because he's done a huge amount of work on this, just to add some value to that.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Thanks, Peter. So, I mean, you've mentioned it yourself. It's not just about paramilitary flags. We've approached this work from the perspective of really all kind of complaints related to public display. So it touches on some of the stuff we've talked about earlier in terms of some of the racist material. I think actually that was what led to the conversation here at the board last year. I mean, our general sense around this was that I think, like a lot of public representatives and communities, were a bit frustrated ourselves with the pace, the consistency and the effectiveness of the response to this. So we've sought really to put our own house in order first. The Chief's touched upon it. We're given clear guidance to our officers and staff that where there are instances that they can deal with themselves, we would encourage them to do that, provided it doesn't present a serious risk to them. There is a clear partnership element to this. The primary responsibility, as the Chief has mentioned, does rest with the owners of the land or the infrastructure. And Ryan and I had a very constructive conversation back in June with the new Minister in Infrastructure, and there's a commitment from them to work with us on an improved MOU, which hopefully will make the process far more dynamic than it's ever been in terms of them coming to assist in terms of the removal, and vice versa when they seek to take a lawful action and seek the support of police, that again we can make that as smooth a position as possible. I have to caveat all that by saying that we retain the operational discretion as to how we act. So the big thing that we've established, both in terms of the operational guidance and the revised service instruction, is that we have to do something. It's not enough for us to simply acknowledge these things. We have to take a positive action. In some instances, that could be us removing material, but more often than not, especially with paramilitary flags, given the way that they're erected, it's going to require support from partner agencies, and probably principally DFI. So yeah, we would hope that with the service instruction, which as the Chief has mentioned, we have done extensive consultation working with some third sector groups who are interested in this particular area. We would hope that the service instruction will lead to an all-round improved position in terms of the response from us and our partners in relation to not just paramilitary flags, but virtually any form of hate display.
Thank you, Deputy Chief, and I know from previous conversations with you that you'd advised me about that memorandum of understanding. Can we maybe get an update as to where that's presently at? By virtue of being on the infrastructure committee, I asked the minister, and no mention of an MOU was mentioned, or anything really that you've just mentioned. Not that I'm questioning your integrity there, but so I'm worried just in terms of knowing DFI officials and the way that I know them, that this might get lost in the shuffle. So we can maybe get an update in terms of, you know, when will we maybe get further information on that? Will that actually be published so we can interrogate it? And then secondly, my own frustration and where this question's come from is in terms of flags that are illegally flying in East Belfast. These are flags that you're not allowed to have on your person, but driving up the road, they're there for a reason. They're there to remind communities. So it's quite brazen in a number of respects. So I think that MOU is helpful, but my concern is that it might start to begin to drift. So can we get an update in terms of when we might see that potentially published?
So there has been an MOU around this for a number of years, but again, I go back to my earlier comments. I think we were frustrated with how that was operating, and it didn't seem to be achieving certainly the objectives that we wanted. And I think I commented on this last year, where actually it was so ineffective as to give rise, I think, to a legitimate concern amongst some communities that actually we were either ambivalent to these displays or some way complicit in them as well. So it's a bit of revised MOU first and foremost. It needs more work, it definitely does, and it's, I guess, to be fair to infrastructure, I think us having our service instruction in our position as clear as it can be would be helpful in terms of taking that forward. So at this stage, we've had conversations about that. We need to move it on to the next stage in terms of really thrashing out the detail around this. But the most important thing for me, I think, is just about making sure that this is a dynamic process. It's not one that becomes beset with bureaucracy and gets slowed down. We need to take action because, you know, we talked earlier on about the situation for minority communities, groups living in fear, and when they see these signal issues go unaddressed, it does nothing to abate those feelings and concerns. So we have an opportunity, both as a police service, but working with our partners, to send a very clear message to all communities about just how anti-racist or anti-sectarian we're going to be. So, yeah, look, you have a commitment from us. Ryan's been working very closely with me on this as well to push on this and get it to where it needs to be. You know, we're taking this action, it has to be said, in a bit of a vacuum in terms of broader legislation around these issues. I know your party's taken forward a potential private members bill in respect of this area as well. So, you know, we would welcome any additional legislation that would help strengthen our hand and that of others. But in the meantime, within the constraints that we have, we need to find ways of making that system work to the best of its ability. And that's very firmly where we're at.
Thank you. We have a few more questions, so I'm going to ask members to be quick and your responses to be equally. And if there's anything lengthy, we can follow up with written responses. Gerry, you have a question on the arrest of a woman, Palestine protest.
I wrote to you about this, Chief Constable, and I'm very aware that the Ombudsman is investigation, as you pointed out to me in the letter. So I know you're limited, but I think it's very important. Mary Nicanaya, who was on a peaceful protest, was arrested, and she was speaking Irish. Others who were there on the same protest just get cautioned. So I want to raise that. First of all, let me say, as I think the legislation is at best inept. And certainly the Prime Minister was not looking towards the North when he put it in, because the problems it could cause could be hugely detrimental to policing and everything else. But having said it, it's in. I just want to sort of, in terms of understanding this, and I don't want to be too provocative, but I think it's a fair question. I mean, will the PSNI be the lead in dealing with anything concerned with the now, which I presume is a declared terrorist organisation, Palestine Action, or will that be MI5 or MI6 in the lead, or whoever, whatever intelligence agency, because they are normally in the lead around what are so-called dissident Republicans and other organisations?
So, yeah, obviously, Joe, you wrote to me about this, and there is now a complaint to the police ombudsman. And it's important, I say, actually, in this jurisdiction, obviously, policing in Northern Ireland, the PSNI, we've got significant experience in dealing with incidents where we have to balance the rights of individuals and groups and the discharge of our functions legally. You will also be aware, I think, of ongoing judicial proceedings in England concerning the prescription of Palestine action. I was sent the footage by a number of people of her arrest, and I immediately contacted Bobby to review it, which was done. And I think it's fair to say, and I will bring Bobby in, we then issued new guidance to our officers. And you will have seen many, many arrests in England since the prescription of Palestine action. You will have seen that we've dealt with things in a way that I think benefits from our experience here, so that we're enforcing the rule of law, but we're doing it with that rights-balanced approach to applying the law. So every day is a school day, every day we learn. And I think we learned some lessons that day. I'm not criticising the officers, by the way, but I think we learned some officers that day. And as a result of that, we issued some new guidance. It's a hugely complex area, as you all know. So I'll bring Bobby in. There's a limited amount to what we can say. But I think it is noteworthy. We haven't had any subsequent incidents where there's been any negative publicity about how we've dealt with issues such as that. But let me bring Bobby in.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Gerry, and the opportunity just to clarify some of the points around this. As you've said and the Chief's acknowledged, there is an ombudsman complaint, so we have to be careful about the level of detail that we go into. But the Chief's absolutely right. Prior even to that public complaint, he'd asked us to look at it. We did that. It's clear that was a challenging set of circumstances for the officers that were dealing with it, and there was clearly some operational learning for us that we've then been able to put into revised guidance that has now gone out to all officers to try and help them in what are really difficult and challenging sets of circumstances. I'll ask Davy in a minute maybe just to comment specifically on the point you made in terms of primacy for investigations and the like. But the prescription of groups, as you know, is a reserve matter. It was for the UK government in this case, so we had no role really in the decision to prescribe it. But we are required, of course, to apply and act in accordance with legislation that's enforced at any relevant time and enacted by Parliament and then subsequently interpreted by courts. So it has given us a fresh challenge, as the Chief acknowledges. It's not a challenge that's entirely unfamiliar to us. We do have significant experience of dealing with these issues and carefully balancing rights. And in fact, you know, we're coming up on 2 years now of really having to deal with a large number of pro-Palestinian protests. And this incident, and probably an incident which you've raised previously around Barclays Bank, are probably two outliers in terms of how we've dealt with those, I'd say, hundreds of, if not thousands of pro-Palestinian protests over the last couple of years. And, you know, I think it's just worth noting, as the Chief has, that, you know, by and large, we've policed those sensitively and sensibly. And the approach that we take has always been informed by human rights, necessity and proportionality. So look, we will continue to do that. As I say, you know, when we have any event, we immediately subject it to kind of operational learning and review, and we pick from that the things that we need to apply going forward. So I would be hopeful that we won't see a recurrence around this. But we are, of course, also fully cooperating with the Ombudsman investigation. That will include providing to them the details of our review and the operational guidance that we found. And if there are any further learning points, we'll take those on board to make sure that we're providing the best possible service. I would just take the opportunity as well just to sort of speak to protesters. I mean, our role as a police service is fundamentally about upholding the human rights of all citizens, and that includes those that are engaged in protest. And we work very hard to make sure that we have proper engagement and that we provide protesters with as much information as possible to help them remain within the law. And it remains the case that wearing an item of clothing, carrying or displaying any article in such a way or in any circumstances as to arouse a reasonable suspicion that you're either a supporter of Palestine action, or a member of that group which has been prescribed could mean that you could be liable for a potential offence. And I think it's really important to highlight that this particular section of legislation, terrorism legislation, carries some very serious implications should there be a conviction, specifically around future travel and employment restrictions. So, our appeal today is really to protesters to say, look, let's work together, engage with the police. We want to allow people to be able to highlight their concerns, but we also want to help them stay within the law and hopefully not see people criminalised in this process. David, I don't know if you want to add just specifically on the point of primacy.
Yeah. Again, and very briefly, I think there's two issues here, and I think it's important to draw a differential between them. There's national security, and again, St Andrews Agreement and the arrangements still stand in respect of that. And then what we have is potential offences as a result of protest. And those will be dealt with by police as we see fit, and that has been outlined by Bobby and the Chief, balancing that proportionality lawful response in respect of potential criminal offences in line with our other obligations in terms of ECHR. So I think it's important to separate those two issues, and certainly there would be no direction or involvement from a national security perspective in terms of the management of protest activity.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, you know, that's just let me say, I mean, I'm getting it time and time again. I'm sure loads of other people are getting it. There's comparisons made immediately around Sue Pantel, around Myra and others when they compare it to sort of people standing in North Belfast across the road. Nobody can name them. You know, the stuff around houses being attacked and the Ballymena stuff and all of that. It's because it's on people's minds. So I'm just pointing out the damage that is done to this point, and I absolutely understand police legislation, but as you're pointing out yourself, it's the way it's policed which makes a difference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move to Mark H Durkan. Question.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Chief Constable and team. Could I ask what the PSNI response is to the Ombudsman's findings on the police's role in the lead up to the tragic death of Shannon McQuillan, and also, I suppose, the very understandable concerns that Shannon's family have that an officer who had been involved was promoted while under investigation?
As the Ombudsman found, and I agree, we didn't do as much as we could have done to protect them, and I very much welcome the recommendation that there should be a protocol between ourselves and the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service with regards to dealing with such difficult circumstances. And you know that as a police service, as emergency services, we deal with so many challenging situations with people. And unfortunately, sometimes there are outcomes that none of us would want. So from a personal perspective, I just want to say publicly how incredibly sorry I am to Shannon's family, and of course the circumstances now with regards to Owen and his future. There were, as I'm sure you're aware, and this is now subject to ongoing litigation, so I have to be careful what I say, but there were disciplinary processes undertaken with regards to 3 officers. One was dealt with by means of a misconduct meeting, and 2 faced misconduct hearings. I'm not going to comment because I'd quite like to, and I've asked my office if it'd be possible to meet the families. They may not want to meet me, but I want to speak to the families personally about what's happened, and I think that's the best forum to do that rather than publicly. So I'm not going to comment any further with regards to your question or what I've seen in the media. But I've obviously looked into the matter carefully. We take the report from the Ombudsman very seriously and very much understand that we could have done more, as I say. And it's almost unimaginable to think about what those two families have been through. And there are other tragedies connected with that case, I have to tell you as well. So I'm going to hopefully see the families if they'd agree to see me, and hopefully I'll be able to deal with any concerns that they raise to me privately, if that's okay.
Deputy Chief Constable wants to come in.
So I think there's an important point of clarity here, Mark. So I think you had said in your question, or you'd stated that the officer had been promoted whilst under investigation. That is not the case. So I think the investigation took 4 years before the officer appeared at a hearing. He was then subject to a written warning, which was a further year. So he has been promoted subsequently, but that promotion only took place after the written warning had spent and after the investigation and the hearing had concluded. So it's just an important point. And I understand, if there's been a misunderstanding where people have felt that the promotion took place while he was subject to investigation, that wasn't the case. It's after the sanction had been spent, which had been determined in a misconduct hearing.
Yeah, I think that clarity is welcome, because it's certainly the understanding that Shannon's family had that the case had been that it was during investigation, but it's vital. While it might not give them much in the way of comfort, it is vital that we have that clarity to ensure confidence that proper processes and procedure was followed, and it's important that it is seen to be followed as well.
Thank you, and thank you for that clarity. I have two more questions before we wrap up. One from Frank McManus on the cost of the resources implications on the open.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll try to be fast here. I don't want to be accused of slow play. The open 2,300 officers and numerous policing staff were out over a period of 6 or 7 days. Can you share with us the fully allocated costs for that operation, and how much have you invoiced the Golf Association, the Cashbridge Golf Association, for your services?
So, Frank, I'm going to pass to Ryan, who managed the operation, and then Mark, potentially to bring Mark in around some of that cost recovery. But I do just want to emphasise my opening remarks before questions began today. We as an organisation will not be able to continue to police events like this if we haven't got the police to do it. And I think people need to realise that, because it's a very different system here, but safety certificates would not be issued. So we will not be able to do that unless this organisation is funded. But with that, I'll pass to Ryan.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Chief. Yeah, I mean, clear was a huge operation. Frank, probably about 18 months in the planning. And before we get into the cost, just to say thank you for all those at the policing side who were involved in it, particularly Jeremy Lindsay, who led the planning. But we worked very closely with our multi-agency partners, particularly Tourism NI, who led the Gold multi-agency response, and working really closely with the Royal Nation. So big operation. But there are significant risks around a big event like that. You've 280,000 people over the course of the week, so clearly policing will have a big role, and did have a big role in traffic management, which only we can do here in Northern Ireland, particularly around the road stops, and dealing with potential contingencies around things that could happen. So significant operation. I was the goal commander for it, so really from the start I was acutely aware of the need to seek full cost recovery around that. That's part of our goal strategy, and really has been was a big part of the negotiations, discussions and partnership working in the build up to the Open. As a result of that, we've maintained full cost recovery, both in cash terms and indeed in opportunity costs around what we put into the Open, circa £2 million. We're still finalising the precise amount of that, but I think a really good example of how we've been able to support that operation, which the Open will have done huge amounts for the economy in Northern Ireland and been a huge bonus and boost to our tourism economy, but we've been able to do that without the expense to the public purse from policing costs. Mark, I don't know if you have anything further to add, but hopefully that covers it.
No, I think simply to say, as well as being a successful policing operation, we would consider a successful financial operation, and that there was no kind of residual cost falling on us as an organisation. So hopefully that gives you some assurance.
Thank you. Are you okay with that? I've got one final question from Nuala McAllister on the Cresswell review.
Thank you for your answers. I just want to ask, in your accountability report, you highlighted that the service had submitted their internal learning review to Jan Melia, who's undertaken the overall Cresswell review. And you said within that learning review that there were recommendations, but there would be final recommendations within it too. And I just want to get a little bit of a sense of, will that be shared with the policing board, that review? At what stage is it at? And can we expect that it would be shared with the board or made public so that it can be assessed with regards to progress and its implementation?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Nuala. So yeah, of course, this is the review that was commissioned by the Minister in January. I'll bring Davey in because David's been managing the issues for us, Davey Beck. Anything that we do in this space, and I think you understand my position on this, will be entirely open and transparent about. So you will have access to any of that material. It lends itself to mention again the work we've got Rachel Langdale KC doing as well in this space to make sure that we're picking up any lessons learned around violence against women and girls, domestic abuse, misogyny, and I know she's speaking to a number of members of this board. But the simple answer is, Nuala, yeah, I'm keen that you get access to what we've found. I don't want to obviously overreach with regards to Jan's review, but I'll bring Davey in to perhaps just give you some further reassurances.
Yeah, thanks, Nuala. And again, just to place on record, I really welcome the review. Many of the issues that we have raised and discussed indeed with this board will be part of that review process. So a lot of the recommendations, I suspect, will not be new to you and to the members of this board. So we have already provided to the reviewer an outline of our learning areas where we feel that they're clear issues for us. Many of those we have already addressed and discussed with you as a board, but absolutely, you know, when that review is complete, and I think we're still working towards a completion this year, we're more than happy to share those with you, and indeed to work through the outworkings of that with the board and ensure that you're fully sighted to those. I see this as a really positive.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of our meeting in public today. Could I, Chief Constable, thank you for taking all the questions and for your and your colleagues' ongoing work on keeping our communities safe. Thank you to all those online who have shown an interest in police, and tune in on the 2nd of October, same time, for our October accountability session. Thank you.